The endgame of Jujutsu Kaisen is officially here, and Yuji is going to turn the entire story upside down. In the most recent chapter of JJK, chapter 222, we see that the story has skipped right to December 24th, which was the day that was set for Sukuna in Gojo's final battle. This was after Gojo was finally released from the prison realm and set December 24th as the date that he'll kill Sukuna and Kenjaku for good. Of course, this being the exact date that he killed his best friend Geto in JJK Volume 0. While many readers rightfully thought that this was setting up a pocket of chapters that builds up to the fight, or at the very least a mini training arc of some kind or something. Well, to that, Gege straight up said, "What do you think this is, bro? This ain't Naruto." So just like that, in the blink of an eye, here we are at the most anticipated battle of the entire series so far. This is of course where most of the attention is going to be for the next couple chapters, this major battle between Gojo and Sukuna, and rightfully so. I mean, this is Gojo versus freaking Sukuna, something that the fan base has been waiting for a very long time. However, we can't forget that this is ultimately Yuji's story. He is the main character after all. That being said, I'm convinced that Gege has been quietly building up Yuji in the background to be the true powerhouse of this final arc. I'd even go as far as to say that Gege's made it pretty clear Yuji's curse technique, and by extension Sukuna's curse technique, has already been revealed. Sounds kind of wacky, but just bear with me here. I'm sure by the end of the video it'll make a lot more sense to you. In chapter 12 of the manga, Gojo points out that in due time Yuji will learn Sukuna's curse technique. I don't think this was some kind of throwaway statement by Gege and he just kind of like forgot about it or something. I do really think that this is going to come full circle. Gege is a master of foreshadowing after all, seeing as how the cover art for the very first chapter foreshadowed Sukuna taking over Megumi's body, with how he subtly drew Sukuna's markings on some of Megumi's toads, and also the fact that Sukuna's mummified corpse was smack dab in the middle of that cover page, and we just recently got introduced to said corpse. So I really wouldn't find it hard to believe that Gege is going to bring this stuff full circle over 200 chapters later. And in all honesty, Gege's already been setting it up, like it's already right in front of our faces. And if you don't believe me, you don't have to look very far, because in chapter 216, after Yuji and Sukuna's quick little battle before he leaves to go take the bath to kind of fully complete his transformation, he notices that there's a little cut on his finger, and Gege makes it very clear that this is something that's important because he even zooms in on it in a separate section of the same page. Now, at first many thought that this was kind of Megumi fighting back against Sukuna controlling his body, and this was like a subtle sign that Megumi's still in there. But now with the context of what comes after this page takes on a whole new meaning, because this possibly could be showing that this is the first sign of Yuji utilizing Sukuna's cleave or dismantle technique. And the way this is possible is explained in chapter 220, where it shows that now that Yuji is not the host to Sukuna, he's pretty much a cursed object soaked in his cursed energy, which, putting two and two together, means that some of Sukuna's cursed energy still resides with Yuji and is pretty much at his disposal for him to use. Now, it doesn't immediately mean that now that Yuji has his cursed energy that he can now use his cursed technique, because after all, it hasn't been specifically stated that cleave and dismantle is even Sukuna's original curse technique to begin with. But believe it or not, it's already been laid out to us what Sukuna's true ability really is, and this also explains what he's meant by referring to true Jujutsu sorcery several times throughout the story. So to fully understand what Sukuna's real technique is and how Yuji's actually obtained it, we actually have to go back to Mahito, because Mahito is the first character in the series that's really hammered home the idea of the body and the soul being one and the same. And this is kind of a theme that's been carried throughout the manga ever since. But why does that concept even matter at this point? Well, going back to Mahito, his curse technique was idol transfiguration, which was the ability to manipulate the soul of any human being. This is how he's able to deform humans into these like curse-like looking monsters, because he directly manipulated their souls to make them look this way. And ever since then, it's been kind of hammered home, the whole concept of the body and the soul being intertwined and essentially being one and the same. And why I think this was introduced so early is because I think this was Gege's clever way of introducing the true concept of Jujutsu sorcery. And I think the way that Mahito was able to manipulate someone's body and his own body to take whatever form he pleases is also the same way that Sukuna managed to make himself look like this like humanoid curse back in the Heian era, now that we we've recently gotten images of what he looked like at the time. He doesn't look human, but he also doesn't look like a curse. This could be implying that Sukuna is also able to manipulate his own soul in order to take the form that he chooses, which again ties back to what he means when he says true Jujutsu sorcery, because to me this is the essence of what Sukuna's true ability is, and that's the ability to manipulate his own soul and also consume the souls or part of the souls of others in order to utilize their curse techniques. Well, that's a big statement, so let me explain that for a second. This is, after all, theoretically how Sukuna is currently using Megumi's curse technique, the 10 Shadows, because he is in his body interacting with his soul, therefore being able to use his curse technique following the same logic. This is how Sukuna is able to use Cleave and Dismantle on top of seemingly some fire curse technique that he used against Jogo, where we gotta remember that he used the phrase open in order to use this ability. It's been heavily theorized in the past that Sukuna's true innate ability is being able to consume parts of the soul of others in order to utilize their curse techniques, which also might explain why just a few chapters back, Sukuna decided to straight up bite the shoulder off of Nana Kurusu instead of straight up kill her. At that moment, he could have bitten off a piece of her soul and therefore now has the ability to use Jacob's ladder much like she could. Going slightly off topic here, this might be how Sukuna ultimately defeats Gojo by using Jacob's ladder to extinguish his infinite void curse technique, but that's a conversation for another video. Circling back to Yuji, all this stuff I've laid out for you retroactively makes a statement that Yuji recently made in the manga make a ton more sense and have a much heavier implication, because immediately after referring to Yuji as this cursed object soaked in Sukuna's cursed energy, Yuji points out that he'll eat anything to defeat that creep, and later on it was heavily implied that Yuji actually ate the remaining cursed womb death paintings that Chozo was holding onto. This of course would give Yuji a massive cursed energy buff, as Gege has pointed out in a past interview that eating the death paintings would in fact give Yuji a massive cursed energy buff. Now you can easily make a case that the way that Yuji's able to kind of consume these death paintings and also utilize Sukuna's cursed energy kind of circles back to the idea that he was designed to be a vessel for Sukuna specifically. Well, while that might be true, there is more to that, because if we can assume that Sukuna and Yuji's souls kind of were intermingling within Yuji's body the whole time that he was Sukuna's host, it would make sense that Yuji obtaining Sukuna's true curse technique, the ability to consume souls or consume curse techniques, would be the clearest answer as to how he's able to eat these cursed womb paintings and why Yuji has been foreshadowed to now have Sukuna's curse technique. And what I think is the smoking gun to this entire theory is the book that was just given to Yuji by Choso that was given to him by Sakumo, which in his own words is a book detailing her research on the soul. I think this is where Yuji finally connects all the dots and realizes that the fact that his and Sukuna's souls were intermingling within his body for so much time, which causes Yuji to be this cursed object soaked in Sukuna's cursed energy, that he obtained the ability to consume the cursed energy of others and utilize their cursed techniques, much like Sukuna can, and the book that was given to him by Choso after he had already consumed the death paintings was the missing link to be able to utilize the full power of their abilities, and by extension fully able to utilize Malevolent Shrine or Cleave and Dismantle at the very least. Now, addressing the elephant in the room, in a brief sequence in chapter 222, we also see Yuji training with Kusakabe, and the way their dialogue goes heavily implies that Yuji has actually swapped bodies with him. Now, I wouldn't say that this is an allusion to the fact that Sukuna's curse technique is in fact being able to swap bodies. I just think that's a result of fully understanding Jujutsu sorcery. This might actually be implying that the book that Sakumo gave to Yuji held those types of secrets in them. The ability to kind of transfer your soul into a different body, and seeing as how Yuji is a cursed object at this point, it really would make a ton of sense. Unfortunately, we don't have many more details beyond this little sequence, but again, I don't think it's referencing Sukuna's specific curse technique if it does end up being true that Yuji is able to swap bodies now. Therefore, finally making Yuji a true Jujutsu sorcerer, because he's now able to freely manipulate his own soul in order to use all of these abilities, and therefore truly become the greatest powerhouse that Jujutsu Kaisen will ever see.